All right, once again, good evening. Welcome to this informational meeting. This is just to hopefully provide you with some information about the athletic offerings we have here in the district and answer any questions that you may have as you get ready for your son or daughter to begin their interscholastic athletic career. So as I said, please use the Q&A if you have questions specifically about what's being talked about. I will do my best to answer the questions in real time, as long as I see that there is something that pops up on the Q&A box. I won't type the answer in, but I will respond. I'll read the question aloud and I will respond verbally. So our athletic program is broken down into 3 different levels. We have middle school and junior varsity, JV, which are considered sub-varsity levels, and then we have the varsity level. Some of our middle school athletes are actually eligible for some of our varsity and JV teams. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that as we go on in the presentation. But there are certain levels that we don't offer that would allow a middle schooler to participate on the high school team. So each season is different. The seasons are, vary in length based on the time of year that they're offered. This is our fall offerings. You can see that we offer varsity JV, middle school for boys and girls soccer, and football. And then the field hockey has been a varsity only program for a number of years. I'm not sure what the level we're going to compete at in the fall is. We graduated 6 or 7 seniors out of a total of 12 players that finished the season. So we're kind of working on recruiting right now for that program. So that might be a varsity program. It may be a sub-varsity program. We do offer girls volleyball, varsity and JV, and then football cheering is a varsity only sport. So middle school athletes would be eligible to compete on the varsity football cheering, as well as the girls JV volleyball. So winter sport, a little bit of the same. The only 2 sports that are offered at the middle school level are basketball and for boys and girls. And then for sports like winter track for boys and girls, wrestling and basketball cheering, your middle school athlete is eligible to compete at the varsity level. So the process is we have a waiver that we apply for, and through the PBIAC and the MIAA, when that waiver gets approved, our middle school athletes, depending on numbers, are allowed to participate at the lowest level offered. So if the lowest level is varsity, then they can compete at the varsity level. Just to clarify that a little bit more, if we have a varsity JV and a middle school team, and your son or daughter's in middle school, they would not be able to compete on the varsity team. It would be the lowest level that we offer, and in that case, it would be JV. So then there's our spring sports. Again, only 2 sports are being offered at the middle school level: baseball and softball. We have boys volleyball where they can play JV, or boys and girls track and field where they would compete at the varsity level. I did kind of hit on this a little bit. Middle school athletes can compete on high school teams. It primarily is a sub-varsity waiver that we get. However, like I said, if they are not, if there's no JV team, then they would be eligible to play for the varsity team. The only sport that this would not happen in would be football. Given the physical nature of football, we do not have middle schoolers competing with a high school team or against other high school kids. And then just know that if your child is playing on a middle school team, excuse me, if they're from the middle school but they're playing on the high school team, their practices will be at the high school. And I'll talk about the process of getting them transportation to the high school and how that all works out. So the fall starting dates are different based on the sport. Every season starting dates are pretty much fixed. We know that for middle school football and all of our high school teams except for high school football, they will begin 2 Mondays prior to Labor Day. And the reason why middle school football starts, almost 10 days before boys and girls soccer is football is one of the sports that, because of the physicality of it, requires a certain number of practices in order to be able to play in a game. So for football, our kids need to have 15 practices in order to be able to play in their first game. So if we started middle school football the same day we started boys and girls soccer, they probably would lose 3 or 4 games off of an already shortened schedule. So that's why we start the middle school football team earlier. Coaches for the football programs and the wrestling program, which is another program that requires a certain number of practices. Wrestling is only 10 practices. They keep track of each individual child's participation and practices. So you might have, 3 or 4 kids that might need 2 or 3 practices while everybody else is ready to go. They're still able to go to games, still be a part of the team. They're just not able to suit up and play until that happens. And then obviously the boys and girls middle school soccer teams will begin. That's actually the first day of school for the fall of 2022. The winter and spring seasons are always the same. So the winter season always begins the Monday after Thanksgiving. So this year that is going to fall on November 28th. Spring season will always begin the 3rd Monday of March. And that will be March 20th of 2023. Unless the MIA changes it, these dates are pretty much set in stone. Even in the fall dates, we know, a few years ahead when the starting dates are. So it's something to kind of think about as not everybody plays all 3 seasons. We always get asked, when does basketball start, or when does baseball start, or softball? And, you kind of have a general idea, just knowing that winter sports start right after Thanksgiving, and spring sports start right after, the 3rd Monday of March. So how we go about signing up or registering your child. So we use a program called Family ID. The direct link is right there on the screen. I will also post it on our social media pages, which I'll talk about later. And it's also included in the notices that I'll email out. So right now, if you went on Family ID, there's nothing available. Programs will not open up for registration for our fall sports until Monday. So you will get an email from me either Sunday or Monday letting you know that registrations are open. I always encourage people to register early, especially when we're talking about teams and we don't know if we're going to have enough numbers to field that team. The earlier we can get registrations, the better, the more timely we can be with our decisions when it comes to whether or not we're going to offer that program. So when you get that email from me and you go to the website, it should be a parent or guardian that's registering the child. And the first time you have to register your child, it's going to take the longest. Okay, there's a lot of information to put in. You're going to have to put in emergency contacts, home addresses, cell phone numbers, doctor's information, medical insurance information, and then you're going to have to answer a bunch of questions on your child. And then there's about 6 or 7 agreements that you will electronically sign at the end of the document. All right. I always tell people use the same email address and account when you go to register your child in the future, because after that first time, when you go in to register them, at the top of the screen, you'll see a drop-down menu where it'll say participant, and you can click on whatever child you're going to register for whatever sport it is. So it saves you a lot of time. Just the first time you have to do it, it's going to take the longest. So we have some families that have gone through for 6-7 years, and it's pretty quick after they go through that first time. So that's how we do. We don't go around with pen and paper anymore and do signups. Typically, we will, especially at the middle school level, to kind of get an idea of who's interested. But we have not done that at the high school in recent years. So here's what your son or daughter is going to need to do. In some cases, you are going to need to do in order for them to be able to participate. Number 1 and number 2 need to be done in order for them to begin practicing. So they're going to need to register on that Family ID. And then the second thing is they're going to need to have a valid physical on file with the school nurse. So our physicals, the state of Massachusetts recognizes that physicals are valid for 13 months. So if you had excuse me, if your child had a physical on July 20th of 2021, their physical would run out on August 20th of 2022. So they would need to have a new physical in order to be able to participate on that first practice. We do have a school doctor who works with us on this. And in some cases, he can come in. It's typically on Fridays. He can come in and give a free physical, and that will get your child on the field or on the court. But he's always going to recommend that you go and he's going to recommend that you follow up and have a normal physical with your primary care physician. So those two things need to be completed in order for them to step onto the practice field. So a lot of parents have questions. Well, how do I know if the school has my child's physical and if it's valid? So a couple of things. When you register them on Family ID, depending on if it's a summertime, it might take me a little bit longer, but if it's during the school year, you're typically going to get a response within 24 hours if physical is invalid. So you'll get a response from Family ID that says, please know that your son or daughter's physical is expired or invalid. We don't have one on file, something to that effect. And then I give you the steps on how to go about that. If you want to check on your child's physical status, you can send me an email and ask, or you can call the school nurse and they can let you know. The nurses share a document with me that just shows the physical date or the physical date from their last exam. So I can go on and see that Johnny had a physical yesterday. The other thing I'll say with physicals, and I've had this happen with my children, is the doctor's office says, yeah, I'll fax the physical to the school. Yeah, we'll take care of it first thing in the morning. A day or two after your child's had a physical, you should either follow up with me or the school nurse to see if that physical actually was faxed. Another thing that's happening more now is they're getting electronic copies of the physical. And I've had parents forward that to me, and I just forward it right off to the school nurse, and then she prints it off and puts it into the student's file. But we can't let them step onto a field or a court with an invalid physical. And there are some times where physicals will run out during the season. And that's another thing that we have set up through Family ID. So you're going to get a notification email when your child's physical is 30 days out from being expired. It's an automatic message that will be sent out once you hit that 30 days. It kind of gives you a reminder, oh, I got to get, make sure they get a physical, or make sure I get the physical that they just had faxed in or brought into the school. You can always send in the physical with your child as well. But we know that kids lose things. So sometimes, sending it in through the fax or an email works best. And then again, even if you send it in with them, just make sure that you follow up with either myself or the school nurse. And then we do require 2 online courses. The concussion course takes about a half hour, and the implicit bias course is about 5 to 10 minutes. And when the student completes those courses, they're going to get a certificate. So the first thing they're going to need to do is go onto that NFHSlearn.com website and create an account. And I always tell the kids, use your school email, use your school email's password, and that way you can remember it. If they choose to do a different password, it's fine. But I always tell them to use their school email because it's easier for them to remember. And this is for the students to complete. So they would complete both of those courses. When they complete the courses, there's a certificate that they're given. And it's going to stay in their account for, I believe, until it expires, and expires in the year. So they should download that certificate, or those certificates when they're done, and email me the certificates. You can print them off and hand them to me or their coach, but a lot of times, again, those things get lost. So emailing it is probably the easiest thing. I've had students do it on their phone and take a screenshot and email me that screenshot. That's perfectly fine as well, as long as I can see it's a certificate from NFHS, and I can see that the course is actually the course that they were supposed to take. And those 2 requirements need to be completed prior to their first contest. And I have done it after school this year. I might do it again next year. I'll probably do it again next year, a little bit more extensive, where I have, I'll set up a time where I can help students after school before practice get through these couple of these steps. I did do a tutorial video. The tutorial video is on the ARRSD.org website. If you go under athletics, if you scroll down towards the bottom, you'll see a how to take the concussion course YouTube video. It's about 3 minutes. You would follow the same procedure in order to complete the implicit bias course as well. But those 2 courses, along with the physical and then the registration on Family ID, gets them into into the playing, gets them the ability to be on the playing field or the playing court. Another thing that will determine whether or not they can play is academic eligibility. So for middle school athletes, they're required to have a 60 or better in all of their classes, and they have to pass all the classes from the previous term. I'm not 100% positive what the policy is going to be for them as we go into the fall, but I will have that information after I meet with Ms. Stanley, or after I talk to Ms. Stanley about it and get some more clarification on it. So those are two things that are being handled by primarily Mr. Hill and Ms. Gilmore. For our high school athletes, in order for them to be eligible in this coming fall, they have to carry 5 credits from this school year. If they have less than 5, they're going to either need to do credit recovery over the summertime, or they'll be ineligible for most of, if not all, of the fall season. And then as we go into terms 2, 3, and 4 here at the high school, we are going into a new schedule next year. Students are going to have to pass 75% of their classes. So every kid's going to have a different schedule and a different number of classes they're taking. So they're going to have to pass 75% of the classes, which will allow them to, in most cases, fail one class and still be academically eligible. And then going into the fall of 23, they're going to have 7.5 credits from this upcoming school year. I should say 2022-23 school year, not 20. So they're going to have 7.5 credits from this coming school year. Each sport has a user fee. User fees are $25. They can be paid when you do your registration. There'll be a screen that pops up that allows you to pay the user fee. Some parents choose to do that. Some choose not to. If you choose not to, you just click the select the pay offline option before you submit your registration. If you do pay online, just know that you'll be charged extra $1. That's a processing fee that we have through Family ID. You can also write a check. Check can be given to the coach. It can be given to me. Checks should be made out to Athol High School or ARRSD. And then the last option, which would be the last option I would advise, would be paying with cash. They can pay with cash to the coach. They can pay cash to me. Cash gets lost. You know, you lose a check, you can, there's ways around it, but you know, we lose cash and it's gone. So I always advise people either pay online or pay by check. You can always go back into your registration after the registration has been complete and pay online as well. There's a way to pull up the registration to pay. Also know that there's a $50 max on user fees per season and $150 for the school year. So if you have 3 or more children that are participating at the same time, you would only have to pay the user fee for 2 of them. My one thing would be just to, you know, if you have more than 2 children playing, you might get an email from me saying user fees are due. Please, you know, take care of this. Here's how you can take care of it. You might just need to send me a reply saying, I have 3 that are playing, 3 children that are playing. So then I can make sure that I go in and mark that they're paid. We're never going to deny anybody on account of financial hardship. So we do have waivers that are available through the coach. They would go to their coach and say, can I get one of the user fee waivers? Or they can even come to me. I've had students pop into my office and grab one as well. Each season, there'll be a preseason meeting. Okay. And they all actually, by the way, after I wrote the slide, they all fall on the same day, same time frame. Okay. So in the fall, it'll be the last Tuesday in August. Or if you really want to think about it, for most of the teams that are participating outside of our boys and girls middle school soccer teams, it'll be the second Tuesday of their season. It's also the second Tuesday, the winter season, and also the second Tuesday of the spring season. It's just the way it works out. Try to get these preseason meetings done before games start. Games typically start. If we're doing them on the second Tuesday, the first day for those teams to play games is usually that Thursday. In the case of the fall, it's Labor Day, but with the winter season, that second Tuesday, and the spring season, that second Thursday, and the spring season, that second Thursday is the first day the teams can play games. So we try to get them taken care of prior to. So if your child's playing during the season, they should be at the meeting as well as a parent or guardian. Even so, if you play a fall, winter, and spring sport each season, you'd be required to be at all 3 meetings. I know I understand things happen. Usually, if there's a prior engagement or commitment, something, that person will reach out to me via email and just let me know. I have run them both ways, both virtually and in person. The last few years, they've all been virtual. I think it's a lot easier to get people together with everybody being busy and doing it virtually. I'm not sure as to what is going to happen for the fall. And I will have that information out prior to the start of the season as to when the meeting is and when, if it's going to be virtual or in person. I do know it'll be on August 30th. Equipment. So most of the protective equipment is provided by the district. So football helmets, shoulder pads, pants for football, batting helmets. Those things are all provided by the district. Some personal equipment is provided by the individual. So your sneakers, your cleats, your shin pads, your goggles for field hockey, your glove for baseball or softball, those should be provided by the individual. We have had some cases where we've had individuals reach out to us about personal equipment and not being able to come up with it. And we do our best to try to accommodate that. In many cases, we have, seniors that, leave stuff in their lockers when they graduate. That's kind of like their, goodbye. They just, I don't know if they do it intentionally or not, but that's what they do. And then, some students leave equipment in the locker rooms. We tell them to clean it out. We give them a week or 2 to clean it out. They don't clean it out, so it just gets collected. And we do have some equipment around every now and then. We have people that will help us out in certain situations. So if that's ever the case, you should just reach out to your coach first, and then you can reach out to me. We do have some students that use their own personal equipment safety wise. And our rule on that is it's fine as long as it meets the safety criteria. So what I'm talking about is batting helmets, bats, wrestling headgear. With the batting helmets and the bats, they all have to be stamped with a certain stamp in order for them to be eligible. So you can't go into your garage and pull out a batting helmet that you had in 1990 or whatever it was. Those are no longer safe. And all these helmets and equipment have shelf lives. And we are constantly, especially when it comes to like football helmets and batting helmets, having to recycle them and replace them because they either are become defective or are past their date. Storing equipment. So the students at the middle school, with certain equipment, your cleats, shin pads, sneakers, whatever it might be, you're probably gonna have to keep that on themselves, either in a bag or putting it in their school locker. The dangerous equipment, I'm talking about field hockey sticks, bats, helmets, stuff like that, stuff that could really harm somebody else. We had a storage place for them this year. That is now going to be used for something else next year. So I will have to, that is something that's on my list to talk to Ms. Stanley about, to see where we're going to have, the football team store their helmets, and in the spring where the baseball and softball teams can, store their bats. Again, we do provide bats, but a lot of students have their own bats that they bring and use themselves or share. And it's fine, like I said in the last slide, as long as it meets the safety requirements. And at the high school, we have lockers available in the boys and girls locker room. We kind of, give a little area to each team so that they can be kind of, with the team. We do not provide locks for students. I will say this, probably 5% of our student athletes will lock their stuff up. And it happens every year. A kid will come up to me, whether it be in gym class or after school in a practice, and say that they're missing something from their locker, money, clothing, jewelry, whatever it might be. And the first question I always ask them is, was it locked up? And I know the answer to it. And the answer is always no. There's not much we can do when, especially money is taken from the locker rooms. You know, we try to keep the locker rooms as secure as possible here at the high school, but there are ways around it. And, you know, we have PE classes that use the locker rooms during the day for kids to change. So there's kids constantly going in and out. So I always advise everybody to lock their stuff up. Like I said, we're probably about 5-10% of students that do. All right, going through, I still haven't seen any questions pop up, so I'm just going to keep going. All of our game schedules are going to be found on a site called Arbiter Live. So if that's the direct link, you can always just go to arbiterlive.com on a computer, and you're going to look up Athol High School. Whether your child's on the middle school team or the high school team, you're always going to look up Athol High School. If you look up Athol-Royalston Middle School or Athol Middle School, you're not going to find games, or you might find 1 or 2 games that schools that we're playing put them in incorrectly. All of our games fall under Athol High School on this site. If you look in the lower right-hand corner, you see that AS symbol. That's the Arbiter Live, or excuse me, the Arbiter Sports app, which you can get for smartphones. But what you can do when you go on either to your computer or your smartphone is you can follow the team that your child is on. So what happens is when a game gets postponed or something gets changed with that game, you'll get a notification. And then when the season ends, or if your child moves on to a different sport or they don't longer play that sport, you just go back into your, you log in and you just, unfollow the team. The other thing that's good about this schedule is you can find for all of our away games, you can find all the bus times. So you go into, let's say it's middle school soccer, you go into the middle school soccer team, click on the boys team, and they're going to Turner's Falls. Click on the game that's Turner's Falls, it's going to open up another window, and it'll say on there bus time, whatever the bus time. So you'll know when your child is potentially leaving for a game. And I'll speak more on bus times, departure times, and early dismissals at the preseason meeting. Some people like to know ahead of time what time they're leaving for a game, and that it's a good resource for the coaches to always go through. The games for the fall don't have bus times updated, so that is something that I will do over the summer. So by the time we get into our preseason meeting in August, all the bus times will be set for the school year, or sorry, for the fall season. So you'll be able to see, and I'll talk, like I said, I'll talk more about what's an early dismissal, where do they go, where do they get picked up, and such. Practice schedules, you won't find practice schedules on that Arbiter site. Some coaches will print schedules and give them to the teams. Other coaches will just communicate it. Some coaches have Facebook groups. I'm going to encourage and most likely require all my coaches to use an app called Game Changer. It's something that the MIA has kind of endorsed. I've used it for teams that I've coached. It's a way you can put all your schedules in. You can communicate with players. You can communicate with parents. You can communicate, send out a group text to the whole team, or sorry, not a group text, but a group message to the whole team. So, when things changes or practice gets canceled or something comes up. But a lot of times the coaches will set the practice times, especially for the outdoor sports. Some of our coaches are teachers, some of our coaches are not teachers. So a lot of times it depends on their work schedule. When we get to the winter and early spring seasons, when teams have to practice indoors, I will typically set the practice schedule, working with our coaches to make sure that it's fair and equitable, and that we're not, always having one team practice at 6 or 7 o'clock at night. Sometimes based on the coach's work schedule, that might be what happens, but for the most part, we try to, especially at the high school, we try to, rotate the schedule so that, it's not the same team practicing at the same time every night. So I didn't hit on much of the transportation, but I just wanted to let you guys know that we do provide busing for all of our student athletes and coaches for away games. Okay, and this is a requirement that they have to take the bus to travel to a game. Parents can't drive them to a game. Outside of some extenuating circumstances, you have a 2 o'clock doctor's appointment and the game's at Mahar and your doctor's appointment's in Orange. Can I drive, my son or daughter to the game? We're probably going to let you do it. You just need to communicate that with me and the school principal. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the last bullet point. Parents and guardians are allowed to transport their child home from a game. Some coaches, like the team camaraderie and try to, encourage, players to ride the bus home, builds, like I said, it builds team morale and team bonding stuff. But if a parent or guardian wants to take their child home, the coaches have been advised that they have to allow that. And then the buses will return to the school. So if it's a middle school team leaving the middle school, the buses will return to the middle school. If it's a high school team, they'll return to the high school. I talk to all my coaches, and our coaches are pretty good about giving a 15-20 minute heads up to the kids to contact parents to let them know that they'll be back at in 15 or 20 minutes. When I coach, and a lot of the coaches that still are coaching use the Irving paper mill when we go out west. When we get to the Irving paper mill, that's when we're 20 minutes away. Please contact your ride. There's nothing worse than getting back, especially some of the high school games where they get back late and having to wait around 20-30 minutes for somebody to get picked up. We understand things happen. So we try to make sure that we communicate with the kids so that they can communicate with you so that, everything's being picked up in a timely manner. Transportation home. So we don't allow students to go home with somebody else's parent. So if I'm at the game, I can't go home with my friend's parents without going through the proper procedure. So the proper procedure would be I would bring in a note the day of the game, and I would get it signed by my building principal. So Miss Stanley at the middle school or Mr. King here at the high school. They might ask a question like who you're going with or whatnot, but the note should explain that, Dan is going home with Timmy's parents. Please allow this to happen on this date. Okay. So then when I get on the bus to go to the game, I give the note to the coach. Coach is going to hold on to that note for documentation. So it's a huge liability if we allow somebody to go home with somebody else's parent and something happens. And I will cover this again in the preseason meeting. It's very infrequent that it does happen, but it happens, especially if a couple players live in the same neighborhood, especially if they live out towards Royalston or even in Royalston, that they go home with somebody else's parent. But we cannot allow that from a game to happen. We talked about middle schoolers playing at the high school. So if your child is going to play on one of our high school teams, we know that transportation is an issue. So they can take Merrifield buses that pick them up. So they'll pick up the kids at the middle school, and then they'll come pick up the kids at the high school. So they can take their own bus to the high school and get off at the high school. You just tell the bus driver I'm here for soccer practice or whatever it might be. If your child doesn't take a bus, whether it be you drive them to school every day or you live within a certain radius that doesn't allow them to take the bus, bus 307 has been deemed the athletic bus, and that they would be able to take that bus up to the high school and get off there. As we get going into the fall, and if depending on what we see for teams and numbers and stuff, and how many kids are actually being transported up here, we'll probably try to figure out how many students are on taking bus 307 up here. So they don't want to overcrowd the bus. We had an incident, or not an incident, we had something happen where 20 middle schoolers tried to get on bus 307, and the bus driver was just, we don't have the room, and it was kind of during the COVID period. So some of those kids had to end up walking up to the high school. As a miscommunication. Had I known, I could have let the bus driver or the bus company know, and then they would have let the bus driver know, or they would have told a couple of kids to go on a different bus. But I think heading into the fall, that'll be fine, as long as, like I said, it's not 20 or 30 kids every day. Vacations and breaks. So middle school teams typically do not practice or play during vacations break. So winter break, so your Christmas, New Year's timeline. During February break, basketball ends, and then April we try to not schedule games during April break. However, we don't always get out onto the fields until sometimes the second week of April, so that games typically get pushed back in order to try to keep it as safe as possible and not have kids play 4 or 5 games in a week. If we can avoid it, we will have to slide a middle school game or 2 into that April vacation. Like I said, we try to avoid it as best we can, but sometimes things are out of our control. And just know that as you move up into high school, your high school teams will practice and play during vacations, during breaks. So during that Christmas to New Year's break, there'll be, basketball games, wrestling matches, wrestling tournaments, indoor track meets or practices. And then even in the springtime, they'll play into April vacation. Just something to kind of be aware of as your child moves up. If they're a varsity athlete, they're missing time during the season to go on vacation. There are certain policies that we have in place. So they're going to need a certain number of practices before they can return to play in a game. That stuff is covered at the preseason meeting, which is something to kind of think about as your child moves up the levels. So similar to the vacations and breaks, weekend practices and games are very unlikely for middle school teams. But I'm going to warn and start to let people know that might change in the near future. Primarily because we're seeing such a decline in the number of officials that we have for sports, and they're going to start eliminating their availability bottom down or bottom up. So they're going to eliminate middle school first and JV, and then those games might have to be shifted to the weekends. So we try not to have weekend commitments for middle school teams, but know that it's a very likely possibility in the future. And the future could be as early as this fall. For our high school teams, they will practice and play on the weekends, both home and away. Many of our sports do not practice outside of the first couple of weeks of the season on Saturdays. And a lot of our teams will practice on Sundays if they're playing on Monday. But we try to avoid scheduling games on weekends because at the high school here, we have a lot of kids that work. And that's the time for them to work is on the weekends. So we try to accommodate that. However, there's a lot of different factors, weather, field availability, officials availability, transportation availability that goes into us having to move games. And I try to avoid the weekends as much as possible. But please know that, it's not always going to be the case. All right, I just have a few more slides to go through. I had a couple questions come in the Google form I'll address, and if anybody has any questions, please let me know. But as you can see on the screen, there's something called the chemical health policy. I'll go more in depth with this as we get into the preseason meetings. This is an MIAA rule. It basically says that any student is caught using, possessing, or under the influence of alcohol, marijuana, tobacco, or any controlled substance is in violation of this policy. We've seen a huge increase in the number in vape usage over the last few years, and I can say that the majority of our chemical health violations recently are because of vapes or dab pens. So just know that, and that could be something that happens in school. That could be something that happens off campus at a house party on a Friday night. The party gets broken up by the police. They usually take down the names of who's there, and the police will let the school know that so-and-so was there, and that is a direct violation of the rule. So just be aware of that. I know it primarily is more geared towards the high school because that's where we're seeing the chemical health violations, but it's something to know. And the penalty is the first time that a student is caught in a school year, it's a 25% suspension. So 25% of the number of games. So if there's a 20-game season, they would miss 5 games where they still practice, attend all the games. They're just not allowed to dress, warm up, or participate in any manner in the game itself. And then any second or subsequent offense after that is 60% of the season. This can also happen, in the off season. As I say, as you can see, it's per school year, so it resets every school year, and it basically runs from the first day of football practice, so August, I believe it said August 19th, until the last day of school or the last athletic contest, whatever's later. So for this school year, all of our athletic contests are done. So chemical health policy will stop as of June 14th. Okay, the MIA doesn't have us track this stuff in the summertime. Like I said, I'll go a little bit more in depth as we get into the preseason things. End of the season, we typically have awards. Fall and winter, those middle school have banquets. In the spring, the coaches usually, because of the busyness of the graduation and end of school year, we typically just have the coaches have some sort of award, whether it be after school, we'll get together at someone's house, whatever it might be. So the first year your child plays a middle school sport, they'll get a letter with an A letter that has the sport emblem on it. If they play a second and third year, they'll get a pin to go on that sport. So if your child played soccer, basketball, and softball, they'll get 3 different letters in middle school, and then each year they'll get a pin for the number of years. Or subsequent, second and third time, they'll get a pin instead of getting an actual letter. At the high school, our awards, we have varsity letters, and that's set. The coaches set criteria. A lot of the criteria for the coaches, 50%. The student playing in 50% of the game. So when I coached basketball, if I had a player who played in at least 10 games, that was 50% of the season. Didn't matter about playing time, they would earn a varsity letter. So what we do is they get one letter A, for their high school career. So the first time they letter, they'll get that. And then they'll earn a pin for every other time that they letter in whatever sport it is. So let's say, your child's a freshman on the football team and they letter this fall. They'll get an A with a football emblem on it. And if they go play winter track and letter there, they'll get a track pin. They won't get another letter, they'll just get a track pin. And then every other sport that they play throughout their career, as long as they meet the criteria set forth by the coach, they would get another pin. So that's what the pins symbol signify a letter for that. For those who don't meet the criteria to letter or are sub-varsity athletes receive certificates. And the first time your son or daughter plays a sport at the high school, they will receive numerals of the graduating year. Typically what we would see those on is Letterman jackets. And so those are given out once in their high school career, the first time that they participate in a sport, whether it be varsity or JV. And that's high school. So if it's a middle school athlete, middle school athletes can earn varsity letters. Middle school athletes will not receive numerals until they actually come to the high school, participate in a sport at high school. One of the questions that came in, I had somebody ask, what is a weekly expectation for middle school teams? So I don't have a lot of information because every team is going to be different, but practices would be after school at some point, whether it be right after school or early evening. Like I said, it depends on the coach. And we'll talk more about if your practice isn't right after school, what middle schoolers need to do in order to be able to practice and where to go and whatnot. And I'll work that out with Ms. Stanley. Like I said, Monday to Friday, and you can expect 2 to 3 games a week. The only way you would get more than 3 games a week is if we have rainouts, transportation officials, all those challenges that I mentioned a few slides ago. High school, it's a little different. I would expect, practicing after school to the early evening, Mondays through Fridays, and Sundays. Like I said, most of our coaches outside of the first week or 2 of the season don't practice on Saturdays. And then I would expect 2 to 3 games per week for them. With the exception of, the sports that, get backed up because of weather and whatever, all the other challenges that we talked about. Social media, these are the 2 social media accounts that I run. Facebook, ARRSD Athletics. So if you give it a like, you'll see all the information, any changes. You'll see I'll post something next Monday when I open up Family ID. Twitter, not used as much. I still try to use it as much as I can. I think that hits more of the students and the Facebook hits more of the parents. So I try to, use both. And our Twitter account is at Athol-Bears. And then the school website, it's a work in progress. I'm still learning how to use it. I don't really know how to use it well, but I try to post information on there as much as I can. Contact information, my email address, dbeavis@arrsd.org. That's my school number. You call after hours. My extension is 114. The nurse at the middle school is Sally Quinton. Her email is on the screen. phone number, you'd call the middle school and ask for Sally. I do not have her extension off the top of my head. And the fax number that is on the screen is Sally's direct fax line. So it doesn't actually go to the office. It goes right to Sally's, goes to Sally Quinton's office. So she gets access to it. And then at the high school, our nurse is Karen LaJoy. Her number is similar, same as school number. Fax number is on the screen, 249-242. That goes to the office. Karen does not have a fax in her office. So that goes to the fax. And one of our administrative assistants takes the physicals, makes a copy, puts one in my mailbox and puts one in her mailbox. So that way that's mainly what you use the fax for. Just to kind of wrap up, Bears online clothing store, if you go to that website, or if you go onto the ARRSD.org webpage, I believe a couple months ago, we updated the squad locker, put some new items on there. Over the summer, I'll look at it and I'll probably see what new items are available, update it again, and probably post something. Always a great idea to get some, Bears gear, especially around the holidays. They make great gifts. So that's what and that store has been open since we became the Athol Bears. So it's always open, no minimums, deliver right to your house. So it's a pretty good thing we have going with Squad Lock. And then I guess I'll open it up. I'll leave the question or open up the questions. If you have any questions, you can type them into the Q&A. I did have, like I said, 2 questions come in. So one of them was, are you allowed to play more than one sport per season? The answer to that question is no. However, if you start, let's say your son or daughter goes out for the middle school football team this fall, and after a few practices, they don't like it, they want to switch sports. They want to play soccer, or they want to play field hockey or girls volleyball. You can switch sports if it's in the preseason. I would ask that the parent or the child email me, or first have a conversation with the coach saying that I'd like to, I would like to go play soccer. And then I would have the child or the parent email me and just say, you don't have to do the registration process again. Just email me and I can switch the registration. But you're only allowed to play one sport per season. Once the season gets going, usually after the first 10 to 14 days, we don't allow kids to switch sports. That would require principal approval. And once you get to the halfway point of the season, so end of September, first, second week of January, end of April, you're not allowed to switch sport at all. That's the MIA rule. So we have a little bit more leniency with early in the season. And then second question that came in was, what are the playing time requirements for sports? So all sub-varsity teams, the coaches get the same message. If a kid is coming to practice, they're practicing hard, if they're meeting those expectations and they're not an issue behaviorally within the practice, they should see game action. It is not equal playing time by any means. There's no equal playing time with middle school or JV, and then varsity playing time is at the coach's discretion. So, there may be a game or two or a case where a player doesn't play. Most of our varsity coaches find ways to get kids into the game. Some are better than others at it. They are competing at the highest level that we offer. So playing time is not guaranteed and is not equal. So those are two pretty good questions that we had. So I'm gonna, I'm not seeing any questions come in. So if there's anything else, if there are any questions, please ask now. Otherwise, I am gonna end the meeting. I appreciate you being here. For those of you that are watching this at a later time, if you have questions, you can always email me. That's going to be the quickest response, as opposed to messaging the social media accounts. I don't typically see those for a little while, maybe days. So email is probably the best way to communicate with, to answer a question. And I look forward to seeing your children on the playing fields, courts, whatever surface it might be over the next few years. So thanks for coming, thanks for watching, and go Bears.